Thank you. I bring greetings from AFIA. We certainly are proud to be a member of this organization, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today on this topic. As was said, we're the largest association of feed manufacturers in the world. In this slide, for those of you that aren't familiar with AFIA, this slide kind of gives a little bit more detail. We represent ingredient suppliers, feed manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, associations, and we do represent 75% of the feed tonnage that's produced in America today. And now we have over 600 members, so we're continuing to grow. And so what I'm charged with you today is talk to you for a few minutes about biosecurity practices in the feed manufacturing sector. And as stated, I've been I come from the manufacturing side of the business, spent 31 years working in that part of our industry. For most of those years, I never was concerned about biosecurity. It just really wasn't at the top of our list. It wasn't something that we thought about. I ran a commercial feed plant in Park City, Kentucky for the last 18 years of my career before joining AFIA. And up until the last 2 years, it just wasn't something that we thought about a lot. But so why is it important to our industry now? And most of us that are here today know that with the recent events, we've had the PEDV outbreak in swine. We've had the HPAI outbreak in poultry last year, and then also early this year. And so it kind of brings things to the forefront and requires us to think about that. When the PEDV outbreak happened, it caused AFIA to take a step backwards and think about what's the effect on our members. How is this affecting our industry? And we completed a survey, and 98% of our members responded saying this has affected our business. And so we got some clear direction from that survey based on the response of our members. And first thing was that we needed to update our biosecurity guidance for the industry. We hadn't done a lot up until that point, and so they charged us with doing that. We needed to work with industry leaders and to develop strategies to prevent and minimize animal disease spread. And then we needed to be a stronger voice for our industry. So we set about that task. We formulated a task force of 17 members, and including scientists, and it even reached out to some other associations to help us with this task. And the purpose was to provide feed and ingredient manufacturers with recommendations for developing a biosecurity plan. Out of that effort came this document, and we published that in April 2015, and it's a document on developing biosecurity practices for feed and ingredient manufacturing. And that's to help facilities within our sector of the industry to develop their plans. And so that's what I'm going to be basing everything that I talk about today. And that document's available. It's on our website, and we can get you copies of that. It's a very good document. We published it April 2015, and very timely. And when the HPA outbreak happened, then it was used quite extensively in the industry. So we look back when we were thinking about what to consider in this document. We looked at the study that APHIS did in 2011, and they of all the different ways that pathogens are transmitted. And we know airborne transmission, direct animal to animal, semen-human contact, including boots and clothing and hands, rodents and animals and insects, vehicles, and then feed, including water, and then animal manure and sold bedding. So those are the things that were identified that were ways that diseases are transmitted in the industry. And as we looked at that list, we obviously were focused on that next to the last one, feed, but we also began to think about vehicles. That's a big part of what we do as an industry. We begin to think about human contact. Obviously, our manufacturing plants within the industry are ran by employees, and so all those things are where we begin to focus our recommendation as we developed our guidance document. And we begin to think about the feed manufacturing chain, and that's what we're responsible for. And it includes selecting, receiving, processing all the ingredients all the way through to the final delivery to the farm. And so that's what this document is based on, is that being the chain of responsibility that our sector of the industry has as far as biosecurity. We decided it should definitely be science-based. It needs to be flexible. We need to consider some of the things that Dr. Tonser talked about, the economics of it, and believe me, I'm an ag econ major, so I identify with everything he said. It also, the plan needs to be flexible and needs to be able to consider new technology that comes along and new events that come along. So we have to have a flexible plan. This is a flow diagram of a typical manufacturing processing plant, and you can see it's got kind of three sections there: pre-manufacturing, manufacturing, and then post-manufacturing. And the part in which we have the most control of is obviously between the two transportation bars there, the manufacturing side of it. But we still need to look at the pre and post side, and we need to ask ourselves, what's the potential for exposure of animal pathogens in these two sides, and then we try to do everything we can to maintain a closed loop inside that manufacturing section, and we do that with supplier verification and processes that we put in place, and by taking our hazard analysis that we develop. And coming up with good best practices. So this is how we go about encouraging facilities to come up with the development of a biosecurity plan. And you see, the step one is kind of a three-step process, but you got to identify and prioritize the pathogen agents that are of greatest concern of your facility. Every facility is not the same. If you don't manufacture poultry feed, you're not going to be concerned about the avian flu virus. And so you got to look at the pathogens that are the most concern of your facility. You need to conduct a hazard assessment of your facility. How can that facility decrease the risk of disease transmission? Look at your layout, look at your traffic patterns, look at where you're at, your staffing, all those things. And then develop your plan and implement those processes and procedures and put that stuff in place. And so that's kind of the three-step process. And so one of the first things that we suggest is look at a supplier verification program. If you remember the diagram that I had up there, and the far left-hand side was the incoming ingredient side, and that's the part of the process that we have the least amount of control of. And so we think that the best way to have more control is through a supplier verification process, and that just the goal is to know your suppliers and make sure that they had adequate programs in place. Determine the potential risk of all the different ingredients that you handle and bring in, because there are different pathogen risks associated with different ingredients. Look at your ingredient specifications that you publish and make sure that you incorporate biosecurity standards inside those specifications that you give out to your suppliers if it's necessary. And then make sure you have a validation verification process in place. It may include supplier visits, reviewing their quality programs, and even some third-party certifications such as our Safe Feed, Safe Foods program. So all that's part of a good supplier verification program. If you move on and begin to talk about the ingredient receiving, and this is probably the most risky part of the plant because we have less control of the trucking coming in there, and the goal is to implement the best practices and the best controls that you can implement on that side of the plant. You need to look at the risks, determine those risks. Think about your bag. If you got bagged ingredients coming in, there's a lot less opportunity for pathogens there as the bulk side. But just look at all the things that you've got going on in that plant in the receiving area and evaluate your risk. Document the cleanliness of trucks coming in. and make sure that you're looking at that. Make sure your operators are looking at what's going on in that receiving area. If you're getting a delivery of corn from a local farm and that truck pulls onto your lot and it just reeks of manure and it's very filthy, you don't want that truck pulling over your receiving pit. And so you may have to turn that truck away and say, you know, you get to go back and wash and disinfect your truck before you come back into our receiving area. So, but you've got to inspect that. So part of your best practices is inspecting it before it ever gets into the receiving area. Look at the cleanliness. Some companies are even installing truck disinfected spray systems that every truck that comes onto the lot goes through that disinfectant. It just depends on their assessment and their risk. The next section is employee visitors and drivers, and the goal is to control the access of people throughout your facility. And we encourage our facilities to do this with proper signage and alerting personnel when they're when folks are entering into restricted areas that you don't necessarily want visitors into. You never want visitors wandering through a feed plant unattended, so you want to make sure that you're monitoring that. We encourage establishing a personnel hygiene policy. This is talked about in the Food Safety Modernization Act, and that includes hand washing stations and lots of different things. And you want to instill a biosecurity awareness among your employees. I think that's a very important point that we try to tell facilities about to do is make sure your employees understand how important it is. Make sure you train your employees to recognize suspicious activities. If you see somebody wandering around the plant that you're not familiar with, report that to management so somebody can go check that out. Make sure that visitors and contractors check in and make sure they sign in. You need to maintain records of everybody coming into the facility and going out. And we don't think about it, but probably one of the riskiest persons that we have coming onto the facility may be inspectors, maybe an FDA inspector. We need to ask, where have you been last? If he just came from a farm, we need to ask, was there some disease there? Or is there potential for you tracking disease into my plant? So we need to ask those questions, and so we encourage our members to work that into their program. Thinking about a personal hygiene policy and some of the things that you ought to consider there, a requirement for your employees to wash their hands is necessary, and having the facilities throughout the facility that's convenient to do that. Removing securing jewelry, not having things like Bluetooth devices and cell phones that can fall into the processes and fall into the feed to contaminate the feed. Storing your clothing, and a lot of these manufacturing areas are not climate controlled, so they, especially this time of year, they may show up at work bundled up, and by the end of the day they've shed coveralls and shed some of their clothes. Need to make sure those clothes are stored in an area where they can't fall into the feed and contaminate it. And even approving clothing and footwear that's worn in the facility, if depending on your assessment of risk, you may want to consider requiring footwear that's used in the manufacturing area to remain at the facility, so that the employees walking in off the street don't take those boots or those shoes into the manufacturing areas, that they change shoes in a locker room and wear the footwear that stays at the facility. Same thing with uniforms. So you just eliminate some of the risk of spreading pathogens into the facility. A very important part is know your employees and require them to report their livestock farming activities. It's not necessarily to say they can't own animals. It's just you need to know what they're engaged in. Now, a lot of the poultry industry may have a rule that you can't work in our plant and own any kind of birds, own any kind of backyard flocks, and that's very understandable. But in a commercial plant, it may just be as simple as knowing your employees and knowing what kind of livestock they own. So when there is an event, you can begin to ask questions and take some extra precautions. In the manufacturing area, this is the area that we have the loop closed the most and the most control. But you still want it. We encourage folks to ensure that the housekeeping practices maintain a very clean environment. Make sure that you're thinking about the integrity of your materials, the ingredients, the packaging supplies, all the materials that are coming into your plant, and make sure that you're maintaining that integrity. And then make sure that you've got processes there to review your compliance with your biosecurity plan. Even though that's an area that we have the most control of, you still need to review that. Shipments for customers, this is an area that some plants have very good control of and some don't. It depends on how much control they have over trucking. If the plant still owns the truck fleet, or if they have a very good relationship with one company that does all the trucking, we usually find that they've got good procedures in place. But the goal here is to make sure you limit the transmission of diseases as the feed is transported to the farm. One important thing is ensure lot numbers, that you've got control and so that you've got traceability. If you have an event, if you discover a biosecurity problem, you need to be able to recall that feed, and you've got to trace that where that feed's gone to. So you got to have good lot number tracking at your plant. Make sure your load-out equipment is clean and your scale area is clean and all in good working order. Secure those trailers. It's common practice in our industry on second or third shift that trucks will be loaded and for delivery for the next day. And so you want to make sure after that truck is loaded that it's secured. It's inside a lot. It's locked up. You don't want a driver taking the truck away from the plant and park it in the Walmart parking lot for the night. You know, things can happen there. And we encourage our facilities to think about using the load seals on both the bag shipments and the bulk shipments, so that ensure, and they're only taken off when the truck gets to the actual delivery point. All those things ensure a better control of the final shipment. We encourage them to think about becoming very familiar with your customers, possibly maintaining a disease log. If they pull onto a dairy farm and they see that there's disease issues there, they need to report that back to management so it can be documented, because that may have an effect on the other customers base that you service. And then establishing a protocol for delivering feed and making sure that all the drivers are familiar with it and they follow that. So all these are good things that are part of that delivery protocol. And then establishing clean-out procedures. And make sure that your delivery equipment is cleaned out from load to load. So as you develop your plan, what we encourage our facilities to do, it does absolutely no good to have a nice, pretty, well thought out plan on a paper and stuck in a file if it's not educated and communicated with all the different players that work with that plan. And so in order for this to be effective, you've got to communicate it to everybody involved in the operation. And so biosecurity plan's effectiveness is only as good as the people using it. So we encourage them, our facilities, ask the question, what's the culture within your business? Again, don't just develop a grand plan and stick it in the file and never talk about it. Make sure that you develop that culture. You have to have management commitment. Employees need to see that. They need to see the culture is committed to these practices that's been put down. And they need to see that management's going to commit resources to this plan. If it's going to be effective, it may take resources. And we may have to do the cost-benefit analysis to see if the benefits justify the cost. But the employees need to see that, and your customers need to see that. And then they need to see that the plan is demonstrated with policies that you put in place. So education and training on this plan, we encourage our facilities to take this biosecurity plan, make it a part of your annual training along with safety training and all the other job training that you do. It's just as important piece. and make sure that your training and the records that you've got in place demonstrate the effectiveness. You want to document that you've trained and make sure that you've recorded that. You want to make sure that you put these procedures maybe to your CGMPs at your plant, into your food, incorporate them into your food safety plan that feed facilities are going to have in place here in a few months. All of that is how that we take that biosecurity plan and work it into what we're doing there at the feed facility. And you want to look at continuous improvement. That's a very important part of it. You want to review it. You want to update it. And the review should be based on feedback from your employees, the personnel that works in the facility. It should be updated on any changes or processes that you may have incorporated in your plant since the last time you reviewed your plan, and then make sure that you're reviewing the records of any incidences that you may have had happen. And any changes in the assessment. What's the hazards? Has there been any recent events that would force you to look at things a little bit differently? And then look at quality and food safety certification programs. We encourage our members to continue to do that. These third-party certification programs are very good at helping in continuous improvement. When you communicate this plan, there's basically three players that you want to look at: your suppliers, your company personnel, and then your customers. The suppliers need to understand your requirements when they come on site. They need to understand what the expectations are going to be when they pull their truck on your lot. Company personnel need to have that understanding and that what's their role, and they need to see management's commitment in this plan. And then customers need to understand also your biosecurity plan, and they need to make sure that it meets their requirements. So you may think you've got a good biosecurity plan, and your customers may tell you otherwise, and you may have to update it and then make sure they accept the practices that you're going to use when you pull onto their farms. So in summary, the plan's going to depend on the culture of the facility to drive the program. It's going to depend on the commitment of management to implement the program. It's going to depend on the commitment of the employees to follow that plan, and it's going to depend on the continuous improvement of that plan. And then lastly, the communication with your employees and your customers and your industry associates. If you do all that, then your biosecurity plan in the feed sector will be doing our job and eliminating or doing all we can to mitigate the risk of disease transmission through the feed chain. And so that's our goal.